Just by way of introductions, I'd like to read out the bio for the presenter. Okay. So Prof. Diniz has a PhD and master's degree in psychology from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, where she is an assistant professor. She is the coordinator of the Observatory for Latin American Environmental Psychology, OBPALA, and works in the teaching and research at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels in epidemiology and research methodology in the human sciences. She focuses on critical and participatory perspectives, as well as focusing on the area of environmental psychology with the themes of environmental issues and sustainable lifestyles, plural territorialities in contexts of traditional peoples and communities, and the history of development of environmental psychology in Latin America. So thank you everybody for joining us today and welcoming Professor Diniz to this lovely presentation. As is generally protocol, if you can please keep your microphone and your video off during the presentation, we'd really appreciate that. So over to you, Prof. You may go ahead.
Thank you very much. You can hear me? Is everything okay? Thank you, Fatima. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude for the kind invitation from Climate, Environment and Psychology Division of the Psychological Society of South Africa to participate in this series of webinars addressing an urgent and necessary theme, the relationship between climate change and justice. As mentioned by Fatima, whom I also thank for moderating this meeting, my name is Raquel Diniz, and I'm a professor in both undergraduate and postgraduate psychology programs in Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, located in northeast of Brazil, where I'm giving this lecture from. This is the place, as you can see here, is the place I speak from, the easternmost point of closest to Americas, of the Americas, and closest to African continent. This is the city of Natal, with all its natural beauty and social contradictions. Here, I lead the Observatory for Latin American Environmental Psychology, comprising students and researchers. Our group engages in teaching, research, and intervention practices within the field of environmental psychology. Our projects usually intersect with social and community psychology, as well as critical geography and anthropology. Our focus lies in understanding people-environmental relations in the way they present themselves to non-hegemonic groups and minorities, who, by their turn, develop their own ways of handling environmental and social spatial relations. Thus, we consider intersections related to region, territory, class, race, generation, gender, and dissident sexualities in urban contexts. A couple of years ago, we also turned our attention to working with indigenous peoples and traditional communities, aiming to comprehend their multiple territorialities as socially differentiated and place-based human groups. In this webinar, I will address issues we have been exploring over the past 2 years. Drawing from a critical and participatory approach, we seek to closely engage with the perspectives, experience, and ways of life of groups historically overlooked by psychological science in our country and I believe beyond. In this vein, I intend to reflect on alternative ideas for managing and mitigating environmental challenges, including the impacts of global climate change in the context of Global South. Specifically, I will explore how psychology can contribute to defending territorial rights and environmental justice. To achieve this, I will initially emphasize the importance of recognizing and valuing the abundant social-cultural diversity in our planet. This includes acknowledging the various expressions of territoriality and historical experiences of occupation and land use, as well as the conflicts faced by this in these contexts. After this, I will discuss the challenges within the psycho-environmental field, considering the undeniable link between socio-diversity and biodiversity as an essential element for the human continuity of life in our planet. I will delve into theoretical and epistemological and interdisciplinary efforts to understand the sustainability of traditional ways of life and territorial occupation, which are viewed as national and global assets. Finally, I will highlight the role of psychology in advocating strategies to combat environmental racism, focusing on self-determination of peoples and the survival of the human species. With the advancement, so to begin, talking about conflicting territoriality, sorry. With the advancement of imperialist and colonial border expansion, coupled with the dominance of capitalist mode of production, we witness attempts to establish a global unification under the perverse and contradictory veil of globalization. This results in a hierarchical system constructed to perpetuate domination over other subsystems, benefiting only a few, as asserted by a Brazilian geographer, Milton Santos, a significant figure in critical globalization.
Subscriber you dialed is not a...
Sorry. Someone with the microphone
Prof, I
open.
have silenced him. You may go ahead.
Sorry.
I apologize, Prof. You may go ahead. I have silenced the person.
Okay, thank you, Fatima. If you have any questions, you can interrupt me, right? To stand up to this global coloniality, we draw attention to the complexity of historically and spatially rooted experiences engendered by each.
Excuse me, Prof. Somehow your microphone was switched off. I apologize. You were saying?
Okay. As I was saying, to stand up to this global coloniality, we draw attention to the complexity of historically and spatially rooted experience engendered by each place and region worldwide. We emphasize the deep intersection between nature and culture, space and place, landscape and human action, knowledge and power, as well as difference and equality, in alignment with the Colombian anthropologist Arturo Escobar. This inherent diversity within global, social, cultural, and environmental dimensions takes on particular contours in southern contexts. Specifically in Brazil, we encounter a remarkable land diversity. That's a variety of geophysical space uses, revealing highly plural territorial experience, to quote Brazilian anthropologist Paul Little. From this place, me and my group, situate our analysis, recognizing the importance of broadening our understanding of non-hegemonic worldviews and ways of life, to involve acknowledging the geopolitics of knowledge that values human and human environmental experiences, often rendered invisible by historical process of coloniality. Authors within the so-called decolonial turn, such as the sociologist Ramon Grossfogel and the philosopher Nelson Maldonado Torres, advocate for breaking away from racist, sexist, and universalist perspectives that obscure the potency of local living experience and knowledge. So we highlight the experience of groups with distinct forms of social organization whose territory and resource are essential for maintaining cultural specificity. These groups, collectively known as traditional peoples and communities in Brazil, directly interact with diverse biomes and ecosystems, whether in rural or urban areas. They maintain a shared way of using land, resource, and their historical environment, which are considered their traditional territories. Beyond unique traditions, languages, and cultural practices, these groups develop a specific historical relationship with their geographical spaces. To draw a parallel, we can consider that even in South Africa, there are also several peoples that can be understood as traditional. Some of the main ethnic groups, such as Zulu, Xhosa, Pedi, Soto, Venda, sorry if I'm not pronouncing the right way, and the Tswana, are peoples with distinct languages, cultures, and traditions. We could add these at that these groups also have their unique regimes of land use and ownership and territorial relationships that reflect their social organization in a very specific ways. In our case, the Brazilian state's recognition of traditional occupation territories is relatively recent. According to Paul Little, since the early 19th century, state territorial practices have ignored and erased the diverse forms of territorial occupation in our country. Territories were often seen merely as a geographically indistinct space for use by members of the national community or for exclusive control by the state itself. It was only in 1988 that Brazilian law began to acknowledging the socio-cultural particularities and spatial logics of indigenous peoples and quilombola communities along their original rights to traditionally occupied lands. The late recognition of these territories by the state, guaranteeing the right of exclusive use of these people, quite directly compromises the conservation of extremely strategic areas for combating climate change and climate crisis, considering that traditional use of these territories have guaranteed the preservation of biodiversity. This is an important agenda of the people in defense of demarcation of indigenous lands in Brazil. So, Brazil, as well as South Africa and other 21 other countries, is signatory to the International Labour Organization Convention number 169 concerning indigenous and tribal peoples. This convention is based on respect for the cultures and ways of life of indigenous peoples, recognizing their rights to the land and nature resource and allowing them to define their own development priorities. Fundamental principles of consultation and participation form the cornerstone of this convention. It addresses the recognition of traditionally occupied lands. This convention outlines the process for identifying peoples or communities with a fundamental criterion being their awareness, their own awareness of indigenous or tribal identity in a broader sense. Consequently, it acknowledges territorial rights that encompass ownership and possession of lands traditionally occupied by these groups. These rights involve various practices for nature resource preservation, driven by acute environmental consciousness as well as active opposition from social movements against predatory economic interests. Another crucial aspect emphasized by this environmental convention is the recognition of autonomy among these groups. They have the right to self-governance within their social, political, and cultural institutions, as well as control of their economic development. However, this autonomy faces constant challenges due to transnational corporations that exploit natural resources in economically dependent countries of the global south. These corporations form alliances with local governments, benefiting from the absence of legal instruments regulating their actions. In response to such threats, the convention, this international convention, mandates that local governments consult affected peoples in a free and informed manner before implementing administrative and legislative measures that impact their territorial dynamics and ways of life. This provision stands as a fundamental human right for traditional communities and indigenous peoples under such a legal framework, an international legal framework. In Brazil, beyond the diverse of indigenous societies, another group with strong collective and historical ties to traditional occupied territories is the Quilombos, communities of Afro-Brazilian descendants. According to the latest demographic census, the accounting of people here in Brazil, there are approximately 1.7 million indigenous individuals, constituting 0.83% of the total population, and 1.32 million quilombolas, representing 0.65% of national population. Additionally, our country's social-cultural diversity includes other 27 segments, such as Terreiro peoples, places with worship and cultural practice in Afro-Brazilian religions, artisanal fishermen, extractivists, caiçara, raizeiros, bezedeiros, catingueiros, ribeirinhos, caboclos, each with specific ways of life and land use. These distinct groups are distributed across Brazil's various regions and biomes, each developing unique regimes for land use and coexistence. Their historical processes are shaped by ongoing conflict arising from colonial and imperialist expansion, so continues in the context of the global south. Within these intersocial contexts, territorial defense becomes a unifying factor internally, and while externally, other forms of territoriality emerge and are imposed due pressures exerted by dominant societal groups or governments. In the light of the above, as I said before, our research has focused on the deleterious effect on indigenous peoples and traditional communities caused by the alternatives to the serious expressions of environmental issues conceived within the framework of sustainability. Despite the positive social value associated with the notion of sustainable development, seen as the alternative path that prioritize social, environmental, and economic aspects of the proposals at both local and global levels, we understand that there are insurmountable limits in attempts to reconcile economic growth with preservation of resources and living conditions for current societies considering future generations. So we agree with Maria das Graças Silva, a Brazilian social worker, which posits that environmental sustainability implies or is rooted in a growing social unsustainability. This is because the development of ideas and proposals related to environmental sustainability lacks historical support for translating into means of social sustainability. There is an incompatibility. Furthermore, according to the author, the alternatives devised by the state and the elites to address environmental crisis, most notably the effects of global climate change, exacerbate the inequality between countries. Capitalist countries in the global north, through their various expansion fronts, have historically contributed to environmental destruction, with the burden disproportionality falling on the poor population, and we can add racially marginalized individuals, mainly in the global peripheries. An example that we can use among alternatives proposed by the capitalist system under the so-called green faced are renewable energies. These concealed by political and ideological way of sustainability and the fight against global climate change discourse are promoted as the primary strategy for a clean energy transition. So we ask, and as these traditional peoples, but clean for whom? Recent studies conducted in several Brazilian cities, as well as in the other northern and southern countries, have provided evidence of the disastrous effects of this alternative when considering people living near the wind and solar power plants. These studies reveal environmentally negative impacts, including biodiversity loss and irreparable damage to the biomes where this installation occurs. Moreover, they denounce abuse and negligence toward affected communities, highlighting the omission regarding the right to free, prior, and informed consultation, resulting in various social and health harms during the implementation and operation of these projects. From a local perspective, the context of Northeast Brazil, where we are, stands out on the national stage due to its prominence in renewable energy projects. The region accounts for over 82% of country's solar and wind energy production and encompasses 78% of ongoing renewable energies ventures. Notably, the state of Rio Grande do Norte, where we are seated in, where I'm talking from, faces particularly alarming challenges, where the energy matrix is 94% derived from the renewable sources, with wind energy taking center stage. Our state boasts the highest number of operational wind turbines, exceeding 2,000 active machines. Additionally, the state is heading to become one of the pioneers of offshore wind energy production, with 9 projects currently in the licensing process. Offshore is the turbines in the sea. However, it is essential to consider the historical context that we live in. Northeast Brazil has long grappled with some of the country's lowest development indices, marked by a profound economic disparities that significantly impacts the region's social development. High unemployment rates, low wage, inadequate infrastructure, and limited access to basic health and education services characterize the challenges faced by Northeastern population. These economic disparities often stem from a historical legacy of income concentration, insufficient investment in both rural and urban areas, and structural inequalities that perpetuate poverty and social exclusion. Unfortunately, this context has also given rise to explicit cases of environmental racism, irregular advances by predominantly foreign companies onto traditional territories for the installation of wind and solar power plants have exacerbated the situation. These companies exploit the lack of regulatory frameworks governing wind and solar energy production in Brazil, subjecting local residents to extremely and unfair and disadvantageous contracts. These agreements, over often irrevocable, confidential, and automatically renewable, can impact multiple generations and result in a hefty fines for workers if concealed. In opposition to the abuse committed during the implementation and operation process, we find coastal communities that predominantly rely on artisanal fishing, with whom have joined forces rural communities engaged in family agriculture within the countryside. So we have the coast and the countryside together fighting against these companies. These groups are organized through social movements advocating for environmental justice, as their ways of life and territorial use have been altered and hindered by the constructions of the power plants. The fishermen's access to the beach is compromised by the power plant's walls, and the landscape has been severely impacted by dune felling and deforestation. Prior to the implementation process, these communities demand the effective application of the prior and informed consultation procedure as outlined by the International Convention 169, along with a review of existing contracts. This scenario conflicts and disputes are over territorial use, where the instrumental rationale for territorial management by the state, aligned with capitalist and developmental logic, overrides historical reasoning and the customary properties regimes typical of indigenous and traditional communities. In this context, the challenge lies in ensuring environmental justice so that no group, whatever ethnic, racial, and class-based, bears a disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, commercial, municipal operation, or the execution of federal, state, and local or community policies and programs, as well as the consequences arising from their absence or omission. If environmental justice aims for fair treatment and meaningful involvement with all individuals, regardless of race, ethnicity, or origin, in the development and implementation and enforcement of environmental policies, laws, and regulations, it is essential to analyze and understand the specific experiences and collective relationships with territories. The central questions revolves around how various forms of territorial appropriation and use are distributed in space, and the impacts of other spatial practices on these territorialities. Consequently, new approach should be considered to underpin practices that align with transformative perspectives on human environmental relations. So far, I've talked a little about the importance of plurality of territorialities that have in Global South, taking the Brazilian case as an example. I've also talked about the threats to these territorialities in the face of ecological and climate crisis and the alternatives that are proposed. And I've been also talking about how environmental justice is linked to the protection of traditional ways of life. In order to broaden the horizons of action within context of territorial conflicts, we propose an integration between the psychological and anthropological disciplines. These both disciplines are commonly developed separately due to distinct theoretical traditions and disciplinary approaches, yet they possess knowledge that contribute to our understanding of people-environmental relations. In this sense, we aim to transcend the limitation imposed by reductionist, individualist, and overly psychological views, as well as by overly generalizing and universalistic perspectives. About our own area, environmental psychology examines the bidirectional relationships between individuals and their environments across different spatial and temporal scales. It takes a holistic and interdisciplinary approach. Studies in this field often offer a specialized understanding of individuals and groups addressing social environmental issues from a subjective dimension. This includes considering behavioral, cognitive, affective, symbolic expressions related to phenomena such as identity, attachment to place, spatial appropriation, social spatial behavior, and pro-environmental behaviors. When intersecting with community psychology, environmental psychology emphasizes the social dimension in transactions between people and their environments. It also highlights the importance of empowering social actors as interpreters of their situations, needs, and actions, as well as managers of the conditions necessary to improve their quality of life. Although environmental psychology is a branch of psychology, it exists as an independent discipline within the interdisciplinary field of people environmental studies. Originating in North America and the European contexts, it emerged in response to external demands for effective spatial planning and construction. It engaged in dialogue with fields such as architecture, urban planning, and geography. Starting in the middle 70s, environmental psychology turned its attention to the relationships between people and nature environments, seeking connections with areas like environmental education and ecology. Its development also drew from its internal force within psychology, influenced notably by perception psychology and social psychology, which contributed to its holistic and psychosocial analysis. Throughout its development and consolidation, environmental psychology has benefited from various intra and interdisciplinary encounters. These interactions have shaped research topics, phenomena of interest, and methodological approaches. When discussing environmental psychology in Latin America, psychologist Tadeu Farias highlights the strong influence of knowledge produced in capitalist central countries, something that could be extended to the other peripheral countries. Unfortunately, this knowledge tends to prioritize individuality and behavioral interventions, overlooking the subjective impacts of the deeply unequal social and environmental structures that shape our context. In contrast, theoretical efforts within anthropology seek to encompass people-environmental relations from genuinely anthropological epistemologies. This involves re-evaluating concepts and challenging the division between terms, people and environment, much as has been done regarding supposed nature-cultural dichotomy. We recognize that anthropological science possesses a theoretical methodological accumulation specifically oriented toward research and engagement with culturally distinct groups, its primary focus. Despite its Western origins, anthropology has consistently appreciated the difference and endeavored to apprehend it without suppressing it. Rather, it considers difference in and of itself, not merely as an object to be explained. Our dialogue with anthropological work calls for rethinking concepts, demystifying research practices, and proposing crucial shifts for engagement in the psycho-environmental field. This perspective emphasizes the inherent sensitivity required during ethnographic encounters. In such encounters, observing, listening, and writing become cognitive acts with epistemic significance. They serve as pathways for constructing knowledge through interaction with the field. In alignment with the anthropologist Marisa Peirano, we acknowledge that ethnography disrupts our lifestyles and ideas of existence. It challenges our modern belief in referentiality of sense and promotes and prompts reflection on the multiplicity of ways of life. Ethnographic practices reject preconceived orientations and theorization about phenomena, and the theorization about the phenomena emerges for encounters with new information and fresh field experiences. By proposing dialogue between environmental psychology and anthropological science, we underscore the need to recognize the value and value difference and the plurality of people-environmental relations. This recognition holds potential as source of inspiration and learning for addressing the effects of environmental issues, an aspect still relatively unexploited within psychoenvironmental studies. It is essential to consider the specificity of social environmental formations in global south contexts. These formations arise from the consequences of historical process, including territorial expansion, marked by intersocial conflicts and the imposition of territorial forms alien to indigenous peoples. They are shaped by historical reasoning and traditional modes of territoriality. So we must pay attention to specificities of people-environmental relations determined by the materiality of life in contexts marked by colonial expansion, genocide, and enslavement. Neglecting these processes and their contemporary ramifications, as well as uncritically adopting analytical lens from contexts different from our own, can lead to interpretations detached from our reality and disconnected from local ways of life. A phenomenon which what Milton Santos referred to as cultural imperialism. Therefore, to construct analyses that underpin environment and climate change for communities directly affected by the most deleterious consequence of social environmental inequalities, we take into account the historical experiences of territorial occupation observed in this context. The concept of territoriality plays a fundamental role in understanding the world, epistemological practices, sociality, and the habitation of communities such as indigenous peoples, quilombolas, and other traditional groups. These communities challenge the universality of concepts like person environment, nature culture, rural urban, and more. In our analysis, we recognize that territory and the historical experience of living within form the foundation for process of socialization, knowledge circulation, intersubjective constitution, and pluriontological insights that significantly enrich academic disciplines. To advance our understanding of territoriality, we propose viewing territory as used territory. Beyond its physical and geographical aspects, territory involves identity and a sense of belonging. It serves as the foundation for material, symbolic, spiritual, and holistic life exchanges. Territory is not static. It lives and evolves through dynamic relations with the people who habit in it. In summary, territoriality can be understood as the collective effort of a social group to occupy, use, control, and identify with a specific portion of their biophysical environment, effectively turning into their territory. Recognizing the collective and group dimensions in process of space appropriation is essential for advancing our understanding of what is cosmologically inhabited as suggested. Let us emphasize once more the cosmopolitical dimension of this differentiation. If it's true that dimension that includes the cosmos and the politics, as described, expands politics through a cosmic irruption, then paying attention to collective use of space may allow us to see far more relationships than those described solely by observing individuals and their surroundings in an individualized manner. So the proposition of this psychoanthropological perspective on person-environmental relations aligns with recent efforts of national professional association representing psychology professionals in Brazil, our Conselho Federal de Psicologia, to develop guidance materials and action guidelines in the context of involving traditional peoples and communities. In this sense, we must situate psychology as an area that, in its work with these populations, should pay attention to aspects such as division of labor and gender relations, meanings of family, household, and communal unity, epistemological pluralities involving material and symbolic dimensions, political organization, and the historical confrontation with capitalist expansion. Notably, the process of territoriality and their intimate relationship with nature do not adhere to predatory or purely economic practices. That's why we advocate the protection of these groups. It's important to combat the climate change. We argue that environmental psychology engagement with traditional peoples and communities responds to the desire for a local proposed agenda within our continent and global south, and far beyond. This engagement advances the necessary incorporation of an ethical political dimension in its practice and commitment to the groups historically overlooked by psychological science. Finishing, to conclude, we recognize the urgency of demands set forth by a development agenda that prioritizes human dignity and all other forms of life in our planet. This understanding encompasses complex processes related to global challenges, particularly in the context of Global South. Therefore, we deem it essential to construct knowledge that guides new pathways and fosters creativity in the pursuit of solutions that ensure our sustainability on Earth. As proposed by Brazilian indigenous intellectual Ailton Krenak, regarding this resilience of indigenous people, we must learn from the creativity and poetry inherent in the strategies employed by traditional communities to confront the incessant process of frontier expansion within the context of societal conflict. In return, we in academy offer our scientific perspective to develop tools that underpin their struggles for autonomy, rights, full citizenship, and environmental justice. And to close my huge speech, here you can see an image that circulated in April. We had the most important reunion of indigenous people in Brazil, the Acampamento Terra Livre, it's the name of the event. And here it says, to combat climate change or climate crisis, it's necessary to demarcate indigenous lands. That's the recognition of the state from the existing and the traditional use of lands from these people historically affected by the development. So that's it. I'm so sorry if I spoke a little bit fast, or if you didn't understand something, you can ask me. And thank you for listening and for being so attentive.
Thank you so much for that really lovely presentation. I think for South Africans, you've really highlighted how the rhetoric of talking about sustainable development and clean energy is associated with many disadvantages for people that are indigenous and rural and often have to bear the brunt of clean energy. And I really like what you had said about clean energy for who? Clean energy for the elite and the wealthy, the upper first class, so wealthy citizens. And what about the rest of us, people who have to deal with the fallout of clean energy? So I really liked the question, clean energy for who. I think it's really apt, especially reflecting on the South African context, where we are currently dealing with load shedding. We're going to the national elections next week, and so we haven't had load shedding for quite some time. However, it would be interesting to see what will happen when the elections is over. So I like how you have brought across the intersection between environmental psychology and anthropology, and the need for us to rethink the discourses and the rhetoric that is in the media that wants to say, oh, clean energy, and without thinking about the consequences for who. So in summary, I really want to thank you for this lovely presentation and open up the floor to any questions. There is currently no CPD points attached for this particular webinar, as we have not applied to HPCSA to have CPT points attached. For all the people who have identified who they are in the open to ask any questions. Okay, so we have, thank you very much for your insights from Tato. And Prof. Bond says, thank you, Prof. Denise. This was a wonderful webinar. I can concur. It really was a lovely webinar, and your examples were on point. It clearly demonstrates the need to be thinking further than our own context and being aware of the power imbalances between those that are making decisions and who will be affected by them. Right. So Tato is saying this is an interesting take on the role of psychology in climate change and environmental issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for the kind message. Yes, so while everybody's trying to make some questions, I would just say that if everybody understood how Fatma understood, I'm very happy, because here we are having this work, this hard work to stand on these communities. So our work is to help them to fight against what making them so treated. And it's a hard work, because we have all these discourse that defends the renewable energy, the clean energy, but the effects that are not visible to the main public opinion makes that these communities don't have much support, don't have much visibility. So it's really hard, and we have so many problems, so many mental problems and mental health problems, and there are a lot of evidence that put together the wind farms and suicide as connected. So places where there are these power plants, there are people suffering in mental health and many other effects. So it's really hard to be with this. I think that there are questions. There is a question.
Yes, the question is how do we keep big capital in check while growing our economies and protecting the indigenous people and the spaces that make their living that they are living in?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. That's the challenge, because what is I think that's the main point is what kind of development do we wish and do desire to our big capitals or big cities, or to our country. What kind of project do you have to the future of our nation? So I think that when you attack indigenous people and these traditional communities, you have one kind of humanity in your mind, one kind of human being in your mind, and all this diversity is not important to this kind of development. So I think what we fight for is not for stop doing renewable energy. We are trying to say not this way. We are trying to say you need to talk with these people, to listen them and to understand what are their limits, because they are not against wind energy or solar energy or hydrogen green initiatives of the that mitigate the effects of climate change. They are totally aware of the necessity of changing, but what we need to understand is to where we are going, where we are, what is our horizon, because when we destroyed these traditional territories to produce one kind of energy, that's not the energy don't stay here in Brazil. The energy is exported, so we don't have any benefit. We just have the bad part. So we are prioritizing the foreigners, not the inners and the natives. So that's the problem, I think. I don't know if I answered in a good way, but that's the idea. What kind of future do we desire?
I think
Another question.
And yes, there's another question. I think you make a very good point about who's benefiting from the erosion of diversity amongst indigenous communities. The question that we have, I think this will be the last question for today. And then we can wrap up. The question is, what can we as scholars do right now to combat these environmental issues? So what is the role of psychology scholars in clean energy issues?
Tato, I think that depends of what you are on what side you are. Here we are fighting for the right to we are fighting for environmental justice, that nobody have to pay more highest price to the development. So here our whole is to fight with these people, together with these communities, to at least mitigate the effects of this kind of initiative. So we are trying to make these people aware of what are the impacts of these kind of initiatives and this kind of projects, to them to have the ways to defend themselves. So we are translating this difficult language of the bureaucracy and the laws. We are trying to help them to understand what kind of damage or deleterious effects these projects bring to them, and help them to fight against this kind of depredation, I think, of their ways of life. So it's a political choice. We choose to be by this side, their side. So I think that we as psychologists need to make a choice whom if we are compromised. So I think that's something like that. So it depends.
I tend to agree with you. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you. People in psychology have had the power to influence many choices and decisions. And so we do need to think about on what side of the law, what side of justice we want to stand. And so I really think that we've had a really lovely engagement with you. You have shared some really amazing intersections and thoughts about what we can do. The university that I belong to is in a biodiversity environment, and so we have quite a strong culture of trees and respecting nature. And so we also have mining companies wanting to come to the community and mine coal. And so I think your insight and your understanding about the effects of renewable energy and various other initiatives by Big Capital and its effect on indigenous communities is quite valuable. So from the division of the Climate and Environmental Psychology Division, we would really like to thank you for your time and engagement with us on this really important topic, because I think we do need to think more deeply about renewable energy and its effects on people, culture, place, etc. And just to end off, yeah, thank you so much for your time, Prof. We won't be taking any more questions, but if you would like to maybe engage with me, you can get me at this email address.
Yes, please, you can write. And thank you again for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here with you in Africa. And since I'm here in Brazil, so technology helping us to be together, sharing these views. And I'm so happy that you have this same view as us here, so we can be stronger together.
Stronger
Thank
together,
you,
indeed.
everybody, for the lovely questions and comments. And Fatima, thank you very much for mediating this meeting.
So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day further, everyone. Bye.